is your go-to creepy/unexplained story. This can be anything from a paranormal encounter, glitch in the Matrix, or even aliens. Honestly, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. High school me is alone because my parents are out of state for something. I had been sleeping on my mom's bed while they were gone because it's just so comfortable. So, it was a couple minutes before my alarm would have gone off. I then heard the bedroom door burst open. We kept doors closed because of our dog, and I couldn't even move my head to see it. I'm just stuck. Frozen. My sheets get ripped off me and thrown over my face. At this point I can barely breathe. The next thing I know, it felt like I woke up. My sheet was on the floor, and I could breathe again. One thing didn't make sense though. The door was still open. As I turn to look and see that, I hear loud footsteps running through the hall. I immediately spring up to go see it, and there was nothing there. My dog was still sleeping, like nothing happened. I decided that I'd rather be at school than in that house. Yeah, what does that tell you? As I'm walking to the bus stop in a light drizzle of rain, lightning legitimately strikes the sidewalk on the other side of the street. I didn't even know what to do at that point, so I just tried to ignore everything that day. When I was 16, I had a group of friends from school that I would hang out with regularly. One weekend, one of my friend's parents had left the house with his brothers as well, so he invited us all over that Saturday to hang out, eat pizza and watch movies. Since this was my church group as well, none of us had had any experience with drugs or alcohol at this point, so none of that was really involved. I was the only one with a job at the time, so I came later in the night after I got off. Around September 10th, at which point they were winding down, having already ate and beginning a Western movie. I wasn't raised in the town or like most of the kids there. Most of them were the cowboy boot and Western watching type, but not me, so I went to the living room to lay down and mess around on my phone before I went to bed. After a few minutes, my best friend came out to talk to me about random stuff until we were tired and about to go to sleep when the friend whose house we were staying at got up. At this point everyone else was asleep in his room. We thought he was too, but he stood in front of us and just looked in our direction. After asking what he needed a few times, we assumed he was sleepwalking and began to watch him as he stopped standing in front of us and walked around the house aimlessly. This continued for about 5 minutes, then he went back to his room and laid down. Then, about another 5 minutes passed and he came back. Stood in front of us for a solid 2 minutes looking at us with his eyes closed it seemed, then he walked outside for a minute and came back. All of the sleepwalking was funny to me and my friend, so we just continued to watch. Finally, after the second episode of sleepwalking, he went to his brother's room at the other end of the hall. At this point, I followed him in and asked if that was where he wanted to settle in for the night, considering he had originally been sleeping in his own room. He waved me off and grumbled some inaudible speech, so I let him be. At this point my best friend and I were pretty awake, so we decided to attempt a prank for our other friends in the morning to wake up too. The shape of the room layout was similar to, plus the left side was our friend's room, the far right his brother's, and the lower end the living room. My best friend and I planned to use packing tape over the entryway in the hallway to mess with whoever woke up first. After about 3 strips of tape, my friend and heard the laugh of a little girl echo throughout the house. Naturally, we stopped what we were doing and began to grab up our stuff after this laughing continued in bursts of ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. My friend's dog also heard it and goes to the hallway to investigate where the sound seems to be emanating from, the little brother's room. As soon as it turned the corner, it looked at the room and darted to the opposite side of the house. Then I went to look at the room, and I saw the door now open, but through the crack in the opening, my friend was still lying as I left him. I then shift my gaze upward and see a shadowy thing almost in the shape of a hand, and I instantly reel back at this sight. The laughing continues until the little girl says, "Do you want to play with me? We can play forever." Whispers, and ever me and my best friend did what anybody would do in that situation and ran out the house, got in my car and flew out of the driveway to my house. This was the most unbelievable and scary experience I have probably ever had, but luckily I can always call my best friend and have him tell me the exact same details. Usually gets most people's belief. Side note, I told the friend's mom about that experience as she was my orthodontist's assistant at the time. She then told me that since they moved into that house, the little brother had refused to sleep in his room completely and she hadn't known why. I had a glitch in the matrix just today. I was doing a damage audit and an inventory audit on our fleet vehicles today. I did the damage audit first. I found a vehicle with severe damage and listed out details. This was among about 10 damaged vehicles inside of about 30 we have on our lot. Well, upon turning in the damage audit, I'm told this vehicle is not on our lot. Befuddled, I went and checked. And it was not where it was when I inspected it. I searched the whole lot. Gone. We had no transport today, meaning the vehicle was never moving. We also checked the location history of it, and it had only been rented and returned out of one location about 20 minutes away. It's never been on our lot before. Here's where it gets creepy. I'm thinking, okay, I just had the unit number wrong. Nope. I pulled up previous inspections and it had the exact same damage on it that I had written out. So, somehow I inspected a vehicle properly that was not, and had never been, on my lot. I began my life in agriculture by working a third shift in a farrowing house on a hog farm. My job was to assist the sows who were giving birth by sleeving them and the typical things. I've always been the kind of person that attracts the irreparably insane people and animals. I can't go anywhere without one of the two approaching me. One of the things I did 100 times a night was to use a mixture of rice hulls and Mistral to dry the amniotic fluid off of the newborn pigs. For anyone that doesn't know, the powder is so fine that it flows more like liquid than powder and it gets everywhere. As such, it was always on everything. I had begun noticing that there were tiny little hoof prints outside of the farrowing rooms. For this to happen, a pig that's about the size of the average can of pop would have to climb a couple feet straight up a perfectly smooth crate panel, walk the 40 feet to the wall and then climb straight up a 6-foot wall before somehow managing to get through a canvas baffle and then drop another 6 feet onto a concrete floor all without making any noise, injuring itself or being seen by someone who walks past that part of the room about every 5 minutes. I did that job for a few years and the more I did it, the more I hated myself. I had begun having dreams that I was being led to slaughter or that it was my few loved ones that I was farming. I'd have dreams of being attacked by the animals, so on and so forth. Since I'm a solitary person and had no one to talk to, it started to work on me, and I found myself with an extension cord tied around a water pipe on the ceiling and the other end tied around my neck while I literally stood on a bucket. Now part of my job was to save the pigs that were being laid on, stepped on or otherwise hurt or killed by the sows. I have been bit, tossed, trampled, pinched and every other sort of injury from getting in between a mother and her baby while trying to save the baby. It, in my opinion, was the only truly bright spot of the job. Anyway, I was standing on the bucket, and I heard a pig start screaming. I closed my eyes, thinking that it had just gotten stuck somewhere and would soon stop when it got free. It didn't stop screaming and I decided that it didn't matter since I was a few minutes away from nothing mattering ever again anyway. That was when I heard a grunt from a pig that's basically a greeting. Yes, if you didn't know they can talk. It was a grunt that I'd heard 1,000,001 times when a happy pig would see someone that they liked. It's technically grunt, but is basically more of deep chuff. Thinking that I wouldn't even be spared sanity in my ultimate moments, I opened my eyes and standing on the floor and looking up at me was a pig. Like I said above, the idea of a tiny little pig getting out of the crate was pretty out there, but the fact that it got out of the room was totally beyond any real explanation. As such, I untied the extension cord and got off the bucket. The minute my boot hit the pavement, that pig turned around and ran as fast as I've ever seen a mini pig move. It would look back at me with the kind of smile that only a pig can have and slow down just enough for me to almost touch it before it would haul again. I don't know how long I spent chasing that pig up and down the hallway, but I finally stopped trying to chase it when my coworkers showed up to find me sweating profusely and bad wind from sprinting after that pig. The part that makes me really wonder about it is that, when I finished my morning rounds I kept seeing my boot tracks in the water from the leaky pipes and the rice hulls and Mistral, but there weren't any hoof prints. I asked my coworkers for several days after that if they'd found a pig in the hallway, but nobody ever did. My dad actually told me this story, from when we and my brother were young. Now, to preface, my dad has always had a foot in the spiritual world, with demonic and ghostly experiences. One such story was that, when my grandfather died, my dad woke up in the middle of the night and saw him floating outside of the window. My dad called home, and found that my grandfather had only passed away a half hour ago. My dad was in the US at the time, while the rest of his family was in China. But, to the real story, several years back, I want to say around 2005, we went on a family trip to Yosemite. Fairly standard trip, pretty falls, fun hikes for us kids. However, on the last day of the trip, as we're headed out of the park, we decide to stop by this pretty glade, with a small stream running through it. It was a bit off of the main road, and the side road that continued was covered in essentially a tunnel of trees. My parents were just relaxing, enjoying the view, and me and my brother are venturing deeper into the meadow, when my dad gets a gut-twisting, horrible feeling. He said that when he looked towards the tunnel of trees, it seemed to get a lot darker, and the trees, twisted? Became distorted? At the very least, it was definitely not normal. My mom said that he began shouting at us to get in the car at that moment, and we all ran to the car. My dad says that he saw the darkness following us, touching the back of the car briefly, near where my brother and I were seated. As we drove down the hill, my brother and I suddenly came down with really severe nosebleeds, and the next day we had pneumonia. My brother ended up having to go to the ER. I used to work at a place which required me to be staffed 24 hours a day. The reason being is that I handled sensitive documents/files, and if somebody needed this information in the middle of the night, I would have to fetch it for them, or confirm that I have it. Anyways, security is kind of tight. Bars on windows, multiple locked doors to get to where I am. They would give me work to do during the night, but underestimated how quickly I could get it done. So, like most nights, I finished my work in like 30 to 45 minutes and pulled out my phone and played games/Netflix browse Reddit, since nobody else is in the building at night. So now it is getting to be the last third of my shift when all of a sudden I hear a door close. I look at the security camera and see someone walking down a hall towards my room. At first I thought it was just somebody that came in, ridiculously, early, so I turned around and waited for them to come in. But nobody came in, and the hairs started rising on my back. Now, this isn't a really big building, so I figure I'll find the guy wherever he is and start checking offices and storage rooms, but come up empty-handed. However, I do see that a fire door had shut. I go to try and rewind the camera, but the digital recording is password protected, and I don't know the password. Anyways, the whole thing freaked me out, the way the person was walking down the hallway, like a determined walk right to where I was. So, I sit with my spine tingling for the last couple of hours of my shift, and finally people start coming in. My replacement shows up and I tell her what I saw, and at this point I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I was told to go home and the manager and girl who replaced me would look over the camera. After getting home I called my manager and asked what was on the camera. So, they said that the video showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing it records is me reopening the door. I have just moved into a new house. One day I was downstairs when I heard what sounded like furniture moving around upstairs. I went up to investigate, but no sounds, nothing moved. Go back downstairs, and it starts again. I go back up, nothing. This went on for about an hour. I almost called the police, because I was positive someone was in my home. I ended up calling someone and kept them on speakerphone while I searched the attic and any other place maybe an animal could be hiding, but I never found anything. Eventually I gave up my search and went to bed. That night I had a dream that I was driving to work in the rain and fog and crashed. Someone approached me and asked, "Are you ready to move on?" And I woke up. At the time I was working mid-shift, so around 10 p.m. that same day I got in the car on a foggy and rainy night and made my way to work without any issue. The building I worked in had security cameras all over, and it being so late I was the only person coming in. When I got inside the person I was relieved and asked who I came in with. I was alone, but she swore someone followed me inside. It was a very unnerving 12 hours, to say the least. My mom had cancer when I got married. After the wedding she was pretty persistent that my wife and I sent thank you notes to everybody in attendance. We finally got them out and she was very thankful. Unfortunately, she passed away due to surgical complications 6 months later. After the funeral, my dad and I were sending thank you notes to everybody who brought flowers. When I signed the last one, sealed it, and tossed it on the table, I said to my dad, "It's done." That was the last one. Just then, the phone in the kitchen made a ding noise, like it was about to start ringing. I said to my dad that the phone was about to ring, but then nothing happened. He picked it up after some back and forth, and when he did, the line was dead. I'm convinced that it was my mom thanking us for sending those thank you notes out. A few years back I got 2 free tickets to the Oregon Country Fair from a friend who bought them but couldn't go. My girlfriend and I headed up the day before with the intent of finding a dispersed camping spot in the national forest about an hour away because we didn't have camping tickets. It took us a while to get going, and by the time we got to the national forest it was nearing sundown. We found a spot to pull off by the side of one of the roads and decided to put the seats down and camp in the car because it was too dark to really check out the site and set up our tent. I made sure the doors were locked and rolled down the windows about 3/4 of an inch so the car doesn't fog up. We go to sleep. At some point in the night, I'm woken up by the noise of something sliding against the glass of the window. I wake up and shine my light out, but I don't see anything. I go back to sleep, but soon I wake up again to the same noise. I have my light in my pocket, so I pretend to be asleep while I get it in my hand, then I pop up and shine it out. This time I saw something dart behind the closest tree, a huge pine tree. I climb into the front seat in under 30 seconds and speed out of there down the dirt road a couple of miles until I get to the paved road. It's like 5 a.m., so I decided to drive to a fast food place and park there to get a little more sleep. When the sun rises, the first thing I notice is that the dust from the dirt roads has collected on hand smudges on my windows. The handprints and fingerprints were around where the window was cracked. Somebody out in the middle of nowhere in the national forest had tried to unlock my car while my girlfriend and I slept in it. My dad bought this old rundown house as a fixer-upper. I was about 8 or 9 at the time, so I could do too much to help him, but I remember helping him clean out the attack. It was full of tons of old newspapers and toys. Think hoarders. Just tons of toy dolls and fun and cars, etc. That creeped me out on its own, but still, we slept there for a while when it was in livable condition. Anyways, here is the really scary part, the part my dad waited till we were grown up to tell us. One person came by to look at the house when it was nearly finished and for sale. She said she really wanted it because it was full of spirits. They thought she was wacky, but whatever, if that's why she liked, good for her. Sometime later, my dad and mom were lying in bed there when they hear a woman laughing at somewhere in the house. They both rolled over and just looked into each other's eyes as they listened, and stayed that way till it stopped, then never talked about it for a long time. They both get chills when they say that story now. I was hiking through the remnants of a remote, long-abandoned town and the surrounding area. To get to as far into the woods as I was, you had to cross fallen trees over a creek 3 times. I had just crossed the 3rd bridge and was about 5 miles in, and something blue caught my eye just ahead of me. There was a man, in his 60s at least, wearing blue satin pajamas, sitting in a tree. The closer I got to him, the louder he laughed. It wasn't a maniacal laugh, but it set off all the alarms in my head, nevertheless. He also wasn't wearing any shoes and looked well-groomed/cleaned. I gave him a friendly nod as I passed, and he just kept laughing. Then it stopped. I turned and he was gone. There was no branch cracking, plants rustling, nothing. He was just gone. Still rubs me the wrong way. The area I was in was a pretty rough hike, very secluded. Not very many people ventured as deep as I was that day. No idea what was going on there. Okay, but this brings me to my own unexplained experience. When I was 7 years old, I was in my bedroom, doing some coloring in bed as you do. Because I live in a 300-year-old cottage which was originally a 1 up, 2 down, 1 room upstairs, 2 downstairs, and we've never renovated the upstairs. My room was only divided from my mum's room by a thin partition wall, no hallway or anything. My door opened straight into her bedroom, and I always used to leave it open when I was little. So, I look up, into her supposedly empty bedroom, she's downstairs, and see a Buddhist monk sitting, cross-legged, smiling on top of her closet. It wasn't scary, just completely weird, and out of place. He was there for maybe 10 seconds, and then gone. I was a 7-year-old white kid in Wales in the early 90s, I had never seen a Buddhist monk. For years after, I just called him the Indian because I knew some Indian men wore bright silk robes, from watching The Little Princess, lol. It wasn't until I started watching more TV than I realized the person I had seen was a Tibetan-looking Buddhist monk. I really think some guy meditated really good and found himself projected onto the top of a little Welsh girl's mum's bedroom wardrobe. I once had a test coming up. On a Saturday. It was a really important English test. 'Cause my parents had paid quite some money for my classes and the test itself wasn't cheap also. So, I was under huge pressure. I did not study the whole week. But I felt guilty, really guilty. I took the test. It went okay. Not too good and not too bad. A few weeks later I get the results. I failed. I had a breakdown. I couldn't tell my parents how recklessly I had failed. I was legitimate going crazy, and I woke up. It was Monday. I still have 5 days until Saturday. I took the test and made it. The dream was so real. I knew what I had done on each day during the dream. I had even imagined facts which I had studied and could recall in my dream. It was so real it made me feel uneasy. Thinking about it today still gives me the creeps. Didn't experience this firsthand, but I overheard some of it on the phone. My sister was visiting my parents, home from college, for the weekend. I live in my own place the next town over. I called her about something, and she was clearly upset. She told me she was home alone and something was happening, and I asked her if there was someone in the house / an intruder. She told me there were animalistic growling noises coming from the corner and my mom's dog was going nuts on the noise. I could hear him in the background. She said the hallway lights were flashing on and off. I told her to get her jacket and calmly walk out of the house, taking the dog with her if she could, that I would be able soon to pick her up. She went outside and brought the dog with her. Her friend was even closer than I was, so she picked my sister up and they hung out at her friend's house for a while. About 20 minutes after that my brother, who also lived nearby, stopped by the house to return some tools he'd borrowed for my dad. He went inside because he saw the lights going on and off, and he's an electrician. Once he was inside they stopped. He kept hearing someone walking around in the other room, but when he'd go in there, no one was there, and when he called out no one responded. He checked the whole house and then also heard animal growling noises from the same corner as my sister. This is an outside wall corner, with windows, not enough space for a raccoon or something to be trapped inside the wall. My brother felt really unnerved and left. I own this really random photography book called 100 Young Americans, that I bought around 2007-ish, maybe earlier. I know I still own it because I recently reorganized my bookshelf. Just last week I was getting into my car, and I saw something sitting on top of the trunk of my car. I got out. It's a copy of 100 Young Americans, just sitting on my hood. Why is that random photography book that I've literally never seen anyone else have sitting open on the hood of my car? Also, yes, my copy is safe in my bookcase. Came home from a date at about 11 p.m. House dark, didn't switch on lights 'cause I know my way around. Went straight to the bathroom. On my way back, down the passage I bumped into my dog, a Sharpie. He is as big as my mid-thigh. Told my boy I love him, and he should be sleeping, but good boy for checking on his mom. Opened my bedroom door, which was March 4th, closed and switched on the light at the same time. Only to see him on my bed, sleeping, lifting his head when the light came on, to look at me. I would have heard him or felt him move past me. I was alone. What bumped into me? My family moved into a new house when I was 11 years old. The previous owners were a family and the mom died of cancer. They sold the house shortly after she passed away. Growing up, my sister and I always had an uneasy feeling about that house. Strange things would happen, but each instance had a plausible explanation, except for this one time when I was 16. In the middle of the night, I was having trouble sleeping. While I was lying there in my bed, the door to my room opened on its own. I could hear footsteps coming into my room. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt like someone else was in my room. Ever have someone come up behind you while you're on the computer? Or listening to music and just knowing they were there without hearing or seeing them? Like that. I could hear the footsteps getting closer to my bed. Then, right next to me appeared compression on my bed, like an invisible person was sitting there. I could even feel the weight shift. I reached out to touch the compression and all of a sudden a bunch of blue static electricity shot out from the spot I touched. I screamed and ran out of my room, waking up the entire house. I couldn't explain what I saw that night. Was almost questioning my own sanity, and that's why I don't tell this story often. For the record, I was 100% sober at the time. Also, because I could move, I don't think it was sleeping paralysis. The strange thing is that years later my sister ran into the daughter of the previous family. She told my sister that her mom had actually died in the house, not at the hospital. Okay, almost a year ago a close family friend, pretty much my uncle, passed away. It really took everyone by surprise. He constantly rode his bike, ate healthy meals, and made sure to squeeze in some exercise before work. Ironically, he died from a stroke during one of his workouts. A few days after the funeral, I went up to my parents and told them about 2 weeks or so, I had a dream about my teeth falling out. In my culture, that means someone is going to die. My mom went on to tell me about a family pic she had taken on her phone that same month. She deleted it as soon as she saw it, because of how much it freaked her out. There was a completely different face on top of hers. As she was telling me, she got very pale. And finally, one of the weirdest, maybe most chilling parts of all this. My dad's dream. My dad and my uncle were close. They were friends for many years. Heck, the house I grew up in was built by them, for them. My room was supposed to be my uncle's room. A few days before it happened, my dad had a dream he was walking towards this black vehicle parked outside the house with my mom. He said he was like some sort of zombie, mindlessly walking behind my mom, until he saw the driver. It was just some woman, couldn't really see her face, but could tell by the shape. She was waiting for them. That's when my dad snapped out of it and grabbed my mom and ran back into the house. But before he left, he realized my uncle was sitting inside the vehicle. He woke up in a panic. He then continued to have dreams with that same woman, lingering outside the house, until my uncle passed. I heard what I thought was my brother singing. We had a piano in our basement as teenagers, and in the early morning or late at night, he spent quite a bit of time on it playing music. I should note, we lived in an old house, and sound traveled relatively well, so even when he was being quiet, you could hear him all the way up on the top floor. One morning, around 8 a.m., I woke up and went about getting ready for the day. My brother was singing in the basement, loud and obnoxious. His voice is very distinct. And I remember walking out the bathroom, leaning over the top of the stairwell, and shouting down for him to shut up. He kept going, so I shouted louder. But then I remembered my brother wasn't home that day. He'd left earlier that morning with my parents. The singing stopped. I went downstairs to find the basement dark. I was alone in the house. My daughter and I still wonder what happened. We were traveling along the 401, Ontario, Canada, from London to Kitchener. We'd done this trek many times over the years. My daughter has to pee badly. We are coming up to the first Kitchener off-ramp, so I tell her that the next ramp is ours and we'll be home in 15 minutes tops. So we keep going, watching for our exit, which should be no more than a few minutes, but it doesn't come. We keep going and going and going, all countryside. Finally an exit comes up, but it's not the one we're expecting somehow. Although we hadn't thought so much time had passed, we had missed at least 4 exits while watching for them and passed through 2 cities without seeing them. We ended up having to stop at a Tim Hortons to pee and drive back home another way. I had a favorite pair of silver hoop earrings that I like to wear pretty much all the time. One day, I looked for them and couldn't find them. No big deal, I'm kind of disorganized and figured I just left them lying around somewhere. I kept my eyes open for the next day or two, figuring I'd stumble across them, but no luck. After they'd been missing a couple of days, I had a date planned for later that evening and really wanted to wear them. So, I really thoroughly looked everywhere I could think. Behind furniture, under couch cushions, etc. I especially looked in and around my bed, as I had a tendency to climb in my bed with them on and feel them poking and pulling when my head would hit the pillow. My usual habit was to sleepily pluck them out and toss them on the nightstand, but sometimes I'd miss. So, I looked everywhere, behind the nightstand, under the bed, on the sheets, under the pillows. Nada. Bummed, I gave up. A couple of hours later, I went and got ready for my date. Just as I was about to leave, I glanced at my bed. There, resting in plain sight on top of my pillow, were my earrings. I was home alone at the time and hadn't left the house in between looking for the earrings and getting ready for my date. There's no way I could have. When my family first moved to CA, the house we lived in had a lot of weird things occur. My room happened to be close to the front door/dining room area. Basically, I could hear the front door open and close. So, one day, I'm in my room playing games. It's after school, everyone is home except my dad, who's not home from work yet. I'm almost 100% concentrated on an MMO, but I hear the front door open. I quickly turn to look out and I see somebody walk upstairs, I assume to be my dad. Immediately after, I hear my youngest brother yell out, "Daddy's home! Daddy's home!" My siblings and my mom all rush upstairs to go after my dad. I didn't think much of it and kept playing my MMO. Just a few minutes later, they all bolted downstairs. There's a big commotion and my little brother is in tears. I'm still into my game, but I can kind of hear what's going on. My brother saw a figure go upstairs and thought it was my dad. When they got up there to the master bedroom, no one was there. I knew I heard the door open, and I also saw somebody upstairs. But again, we had a lot of strange things happen at that house. When I was younger, I used to routinely sneak out of the house at night to meet up with friends and perform acts of minor mischief and light vandalism. One of the newer additions to the group lived a little out of the way, but we were always game to pick him up because it meant crossing through the tall grasses of a farm that stood between his and our corner of suburbia. One crisp, cool autumn evening, we had concluded our business of hopping a pool fence and rearranging the poolside furniture, scandalous, and most of the other teens had gone home for the evening, so I decided to walk my friend home. We cut through the tall grasses in the farm and took a seat in the middle of them by a tree that had a series of small boulders that made for ideal sitting. We talked about the usual teenage angsty, who liked who, what you were going to do when you grew up, who was going to move out first to escape their oppressive suburban life first. There was a lull in conversation, and I remember hearing a dog barking in the distance by the nearby farmhouse. I glanced up, and looming over the tall glass were three person-shaped forms. Not together. Not moving. Spread several hundred feet apart in the field, stock still. To clarify, this was a field of grass. No scarecrows, no tree save the one, and nothing that could realistically make these shapes. I froze up, and looked over to my friend, shakily asking if he could see it. I didn't clarify because he gave a terrified nod. None of the figures moved an inch. Indistinct and shadowy, they remained exactly rooted to the spot, and we were absolutely petrified. Then, closer than close, the insisting growling of a dog no less than 10 feet away from us. Somewhere in the grass. Right on top of us. We both got up and bolted, but nothing chased after. Not the dog. Not the figures. As I stood huddled with my friend hiding behind a car on a suburban street, the moon tucked behind a cloud formation that cast a small pale thread of light down only on us, I believed in ghosts. I stayed at my friend's house for as long as it took for us to think up a reasonable explanation for what we'd seen. I had to get home, and the only tangible way back was through that field. Plus, we had to prove it to ourselves. Prove to ourselves that it had been trees we'd failed to notice, or scarecrows that had been put up for autumn. Anything at all. We came back to the field, armed with aluminum baseball bats for self-defense, and shakily stepped back into the area with one tree and the standing stones, and surveyed the field. Nothing. The horizon was completely consistent. Tall grass. No shadows. No shapes. No trees. No scarecrows. No dog. Nothing to explain what we'd seen, and nothing to stop me from bolting across the property terrified out of my mind. No one believes that we saw what we say we saw or think we're blowing it out of proportion. Those grasses were head high to me at 6 feet, and the stationary figures we saw had ended easily 2 feet over the grass. I didn't sleep well that night, and while I've mostly put it out of my mind, I won't forget. The farm was sold off and turned into a development not long after I moved away, and some nights I can't help but think, I hope they didn't build near the standing stones. It reads like a creepypasta, but I lived it. And only the friend I lived it with believes me to this day. A disembodied voice may have saved my sister's life. When I was about 12, my family lived in my great-grandmother's house. She had died in that house before my sister and I were born, but we knew that it was her home we were staying in. I'm sitting in the front room as my sister walks toward the front door, and she suddenly stops and turns to me. "What did you say?" she asked. I hadn't said anything. I was sitting quietly with headphones on. We're looking at each other confused, and suddenly a car spins out in the street in front of our house. The driver regains control and takes off at high speed again. My sister was about to walk to her friend's house and might have crossed paths with that car if she had left the house. We're both startled, and my sister tells me that a stern voice that sounded like Mom told her to shut that door. Mom was in her bedroom, but when we asked her, she hadn't said anything or left her room. Somewhat related, my sister had talked about dreams she had where she would come home and speak to an old woman. One day my mom finds an old photo album and my sister instantly recognizes a picture of the old woman from her dreams. It was our great-grandmother whose home we were staying in. From what I've learned over the years, things like this are common for the women in my family. Not really creepy, just a bit odd. Not creepy, just unexplained, well, some minor creepiness for our son. We lived near an American Civil War battlefield and cemetery for a few years. There were trails through the woods that we would hike a lot. One day we were looking at the cemetery and my wife heard me walk up to her. We were the only ones there, so she turned to say something. I'm nowhere nearby, but on the other side looking at a cannon. From that day we started experiencing oddities. Her car was always kept in the garage and its inside mirror kept moving overnight. It wasn't drooping from a loose fitting but would be a random direction. Sometimes it would be pointed out. Other times sideways. Weird, but I kinda dismissed it as her bumping it while getting her purse or other items when getting out. Then her car went into the shop and the next morning I went to go to work and the mirror in my truck, which I parked in the driveway with the doors locked, was moved upward. Next morning, same thing, different direction. She got her car back and my mirror never moved again. There were little silly things too, typical haunting stuff like things moving, the sense of somebody behind you, etc. Also, our house was ranch style with the master bedroom on the first floor and our 8 dudes bedrooms on the second right above ours. The flooring job was substandard, so we heard his every movement. He started going to the bathroom, which was down a hallway and halfway across the second floor from his room, a lot, but every time we'd go check on him, he'd be asleep. So, one night we decided to catch him coming out of the bathroom for no reason other than to make sure he was okay and to tell him to quit stomping like an elephant because come morning he never remembered to go. We never were able to. Every time he'd go to the bathroom, one of us would head upstairs while the other stayed in bed. We wouldn't hear him return and the others would find him asleep in his bed. The next morning, we asked him if he was up and walking around last night and he said no, but that for weeks something would walk up to and away from his door but not open it. My wife turned to the room and said, "You're welcome to hang around, but please stop walking up to our son's room at night, you're scaring him." The footsteps never reoccurred after that, although the car mirror thing kept on. Could she have been pranking me? Maybe. But one of the times my truck's mirror moved was after I'd gotten home and I went to go to the store a couple of hours later. The only set of keys to it had never been left in my pocket. Could our son have been pranking us? Again, possible, but the flooring was so bad in one spot that even our cat walking over it caused it to squeak, making it nearly impossible for him to get back to his bedroom without us noticing. At my dad's funeral, my sister, my aunt, dad's sister, and I all sat around the table discussing various things. One of the things we talked about was my cousin's funeral. This was my aunt's daughter. She died about 12 years prior. She was hit by a drunk driver while on vacation with our grandparents in Myrtle Beach and suffered an internal decapitation. She was DOA. She was 10 to 11 years old, going into 5th grade. My sister was 8, I was 5. I don't remember too much about her or the funeral tbh. My sister told the story about how she and a friend had gone to play at the playground where my cousin had gone to school. While they were playing, they saw a little girl hanging out around them but never coming up to them and never saying anything. Both my sister and her friend were freaked out. The girl was wearing jean short overalls, a white flowery tee, and had long brown hair braided into 2 pigtails. I chimed in and said that girl must be really poor and not able to buy new clothes because when I would play there, I went to that elementary, that little girl was there, and she would follow me around the playground. My friends all saw her too, and they thought it was weird. For some reason, she didn't weird me out. I just thought she was shy and wanted friends. She was always wearing the exact same outfit my sister described and had long brown hair braided into pigtails. This is when my aunt, who is now in tears, chimes in. It turns out that my cousin was buried in a brand new pair of blue jean short overalls, a white tee with flowers on it, and with her long brown hair braided into 2 pigtails. We never knew what she had been buried in because it was a closed casket funeral. She was really beat up. My sister and I have no doubt that the girl we both saw on the playground was our cousin. When I was 8.5-ish, my friend and I liked to go push biking a lot. We lived in a small country town, so we're pretty much given free rein to just disappear for the day. It was a weekend, and as we were riding up the crest of a small hill that overlooked a valley in the town, I started to get this deeply uneasy feeling. We stopped at the top. From where we were, we looked out over the valley and directly at the next hill, because Australia really just has bumps, which is where our primary school was. The bottom of that hill was the bottom of the school, and it was the road where all the parents picked up their kids. As I'm looking out over the valley, enjoying the sunshine and the breeze, movement catches my eye. I look back at the school, and I freeze in terror as I watch one car go careening into a car pulled up on the side. I see the 2 cars smash and crumple up. I can hear the crackle of breaking glass, the rattling thump of the impact, and I know with a bone-deep, terrifying certainty that my other close friend, her sister, and mom are in there, and that they're dead, and my friend is going to be left all alone. This was an unshaking fact in my mind as I stared at the accident. I didn't question how I could so clearly hear the screams of the onlookers, the screech of tearing metal, or the ozone stink of hot metal. Even though I was too far away to even be able to hear anything somehow, I was getting sensory overload, like I was right there. My best friend asked me what was wrong. I'm shaking and crying at this point, so I managed to stutter and somehow to get across what I've seen. She's puzzled, so my attention focuses back on her as she explains that there is nothing wrong. What am I freaking out about? So, I look back, still horrified, and there's nothing there. Everything is still quiet and calm. A week later, in exactly the same spot, my friend was in a devastating accident. Her mom was picking her and her older sister up from school when someone lost control of their car and smashed into them. The mother and sister died on impact, and my friend was hospitalized for months afterwards. I felt horrifically guilty for years afterwards. I should have told anyone what I saw, but it was so strange and unnerving that I just tried to forget about it instead. I worked in a bar, an old building, countless ghostly events. Ghost hunters actually investigated the building and informed me that there were at least 2 ghosts present during the investigation. A young lady, 19, that had a crush on me and would follow me home, and an older man, red and black plaid shirt. I know this because I saw him once and tried to serve him a beer. I will just throw a couple short explanations here. Bars are closed, doors are locked, buildings are empty, music is shut off, TVs turned off. I am taking the trash out and had to walk about 100 foot down a hallway where for 90 of the walks, I could not see the seating area of the bar. Prop opens the door, tosses the trash in the garbage, shuts the door, was never more than 2 feet from this door. As I walk back towards the bar, I hear loud noises, like partying, glasses/bottles clanking, music, just typical busy bar noises. I start walking slower, completely freaked out. I slowly creep towards the part of the hallway where I can see the seating area, sounds get louder, I peek through the blackened plexiglass wall behind my liquor shelves, I see nothing, but the sounds are louder. I go round the corner and can see 80% of the seating area, see nothing, and the sound stops instantly. I walk past the glassware and round a corner to see the whole seating area, nothing. Then I hear a sound ting. Bouncing wine glass fell about 6 foot, bounced off counter, bounced across the floor about 9, made a 90 degrees right-hand turn, bounced another 2 and sat upright. Then I heard a ting sound as if someone flicked the glass. I called the police and had them sit with me until I finished closing up for the night. I have other stories as well, but fear if I add them this post will be written off as too long. Once upon a time, I lived with a couple and their child. They asked me to babysit so they could have an evening together. I agreed. Fast forward to bedtime, the child doesn't want to go to sleep because of the monsters. The child is adamantly sincere, which creeps me out a bit. But I play it cool. I look around the room, pretending to scare them away. This does the trick, and the child falls asleep. Later, I'm sitting in the living room, which is oriented, so the couch faces away from the main entry. I'm watching TV, expecting the couple to be back at any minute. That's when I hear the entry door open and close, just like I've heard it many times before. With a smile on my face, based on my success with the child and the knowledge of my good deed, I stand and turn it towards the door. There is no one there. I'm skeptical of the paranormal, but this unnerved me. Once the couple actually returns, I tell one of them about it while we have a smoke. He says, "Oh, yeah, we were gonna tell you that stuff happens here all the time, particularly in the child's room, but we didn't want to scare you." Needless to say, I slept poorly in my basement bedroom for several days. I was 7 or 8 at the time and my mom had driven me home from a church choir recital. As we pulled into our garage, I saw what I thought was a black shadowy figure/creature in our side yard moving around our garbage bins. In retrospect, it could have been a black cat or something, but whatever, it was terrifying enough for me to freak out and tell my mom. She pulled the van partially into the garage and walked outside to take a look and convince me it was nothing while I watched from the back seat. To my horror though, her face went pale, and she sprinted inside, leaving me in the van. I hid under the back seat, not really knowing what to do for a couple of minutes, but finally got my nerves up to run into the house. I came in to see my mom panicking and my dad on the phone with a 911 dispatcher. Over the course of a couple minutes, I found out that while walking around the side yard to see whatever monster I was so afraid of, my mom had actually seen us across the street neighbor having a heart attack on his driveway. So, in the most unexplainable event of my life, I inadvertently saved a man's life by seeing a monster/ghost/stray cat sneaking around the recycling bin. When I was a lot younger, maybe about 13 years old, my family and I were vacationing in St. Simon's Island, GA. I had an aunt who lived there who, at the time, gave tours of the reportedly haunted lighthouse on the island. Well, one night she hooked us up and gave us a private tour of the lighthouse after hours, as in there was no one else there except for my aunt who was giving the tour and my family and I. Since the lighthouse was haunted, throughout the entire tour, I was anxiously awaiting some paranormal activity of some kind. Unfortunately, nothing remotely paranormal happened. So, my aunt led us out the front door of the lighthouse and turned on the alarm for the night, so that no one would break into the lighthouse. Note, I personally watched her check the lighthouse, put the alarm on, and lock the doors. Then, my aunt got into her car parked out front while my family and I decided to just walk around a little bit and look at the outside of the lighthouse. That's when we saw it. We were looking up at one of the second-story windows in the lighthouse and saw one of the curtains slightly peeling back. I was able to see a sliver of what looked like a woman's face peeking out. For literally a second, I saw one of her eyes and upper forehead, and her skin had a very gray tone to it. Then the curtain snapped shut. At this point, my legs were shaking like jelly, and I turned to my family to see if they had seen what I had just seen. Everyone saw the curtain peel back, but my dad was the only one that saw the woman's face. Anxious to see more, we ran around looking at the other windows of the lighthouse, when we caught a glimpse of one of the upper windows above the third-floor landing. There was an up and down window shade on this window, rather than a peel-back curtain like on the other window. All of a sudden, the window shade started going up and down very rapidly. This lasted for almost 30 seconds before coming to a complete halt. But the weird part was that, because this window was above a landing, there were no stairs beneath the window for anyone to stand on to be able to move the curtains. We did not see any more ghosts that night, but we immediately called my aunt who was already at home by this point. She assured us that no one could have been in the lighthouse because there are sensors inside that would have set off the alarm. She told us that when the lighthouse was first founded, the lighthouse assistant killed his boss for having an affair with his wife. This murder took place on the front steps of the lighthouse. My aunt told us several experiences that she had also had inside of this lighthouse if you are interested in hearing more. This had to have been about 2 years ago during the summer. I had this dream that I was in this old-timey train station, and I was standing next to this man wearing a brown trench coat and one of those fedoras reporters used to wear. The man then turned to me and said, "I'm going to pick up your Uncle Bud. Don't worry about him, he's going to be just fine." As the man turned away, the train pulled up and the man walked on. I woke up from the dream as soon as the train pulled out of the station. When I woke up it was about 1 in the morning. The next morning, I get the news that my great-uncle Bud died in the night around 1 a.m. I immediately told my parents about the dream. After describing the man in the station, my dad shockingly exclaimed that he knew that the man in my dream was his dad who had passed years before I was born. According to my father, his dad wore the same brown trench coat and hat, and it made sense that his dad picked Uncle Bud because they used to be really good friends. I remember at that time being really shaky on my beliefs of the paranormal, and sometimes I still am, but I truly cannot explain that. My story is placed in Mexico and happened to my grandmother. Sorry for the wall of text, I am on my tablet, and it sucks. I met my paternal grandmother twice because she lived in Mexico, but I heard this from my dad and then confirmed by her when we visited. Well, the story goes that my grandfather was supposed to come home early, 8 p.m., to help her empty a heavy water basin she needed to wash clothes in, by hand, at night so when she hangs the clothes sun won't fade colors. Well, Grandpa goes to the bar down the street instead and Grandma was left to do the heavy lifting alone. She began cussing up a storm directed at my grandfather, still not home by 2 a.m. She said she was cursing aloud because that's how angry she was. Well, their house is located on the corner of their property, maybe 3 city blocks of fields. So she is cursing my grandpa out when she sees a man approaching in the distance who she assumes is my granddad, but as he gets closer she said he somehow started morphing between a huge black dog and a man. 1 second there is a dog and 1 second there is a man, and is starting to get close fast, so she runs inside and latches the doors with the metal bar. There is no knobs or keyholes, just a thick metal that blocks the door from opening, and the windows are these metal little doors that have the bar that goes in a hole in the wall. Well, she literally sees the metal slide out of the hole and the window swings open, and on the other side there is a handsome man asking if she needed help with the ugliest/prettiest smile. Well, my grandma wasn't about to fall for it and instantly replies, "Go back to hell, Satan," and slams the window. She begins praying until she hears banging on the door, which is now my grandpa trying to get in the house. She immediately lets him in and tells him what happened, which she thinks is pretty funny considering she was cussing him out. However, his tune changed the next day when outside the window where the man was standing there is a mess of huge paw prints in the soft dirt. And against the wall on the sides, the window high up on the wall. They got a white magic witch to check out their house, and she was like, "That you'll need a priest for this," so they got a priest who blessed their house and whatnot. I always heard this story in Spanish, which I think makes it scarier, but there you go, people. I was catching a train one day and I found a DVD on a seat. I checked to see if anyone owned it, but the train car was empty, so I stuffed it in my bag. That night I watched a short film that was on DVD. In the film, the protagonist found a DVD on train, and later on in the film, he met the star on the DVD that he had found. Fast forward to a few nights later and I was at a restaurant and saw the actor who played the protagonist. Not quite believing what was happening, I walked up to him, introduced myself, and told him I had found the DVD of the movie he starred in on the train. Initially, he said something like, "Oh cool." Then as it sunk in, his face went pale, his mouth gaped, and we both had to have a drink to recover from our minds being blown up. Was camping deep in the woods near a Buddhist monastery in Bloomington, Indiana with 2 friends of mine. While we were in the woods, we found a spot on top of a hill with no trees, perfect for a campfire/stargazing. As we're looking at the stars, we notice a bright spot zagging along as if it were pointed by a shaky-handed laser pointer. Suddenly it raced east, then back west, then south over us and back north until we didn't see it anymore. Suddenly it was right near us, burst into 4 lights with one remaining the main one while the others darted in different directions. My friend was starting to freak out, so we booked it back, keeping a bright tri-light to our NW as a guide back. It looked like the top of a radio tower. It was pitch black under the canopy. The speeds at which those lights came and went were greater than any live jets or airplanes I've seen personally or online. My friend recorded most of it, with a phone camera back then still showing the light clearly zooming across the sky. When he went back a couple of days later with his dad, he didn't see any lights, nor our guide beacon home. I've had a handful of creepy things happen in my life. Here's an interesting one from my childhood, since I haven't heard of anything like this from anyone else, but if you have something similar or an explanation, let me know. When I was around 8 years old, I lived on a military base in Hawaii. My older brother and I used to explore all over the woods and streets, but the oddest place we kept coming back to be this sort of concrete sewer opening that had a metal grate over it. It was located at a dugout ditch by the side of the road. Standing over it as looking down, you could see it was a pretty deep drop. So, me and my brother used to talk to this thing that lived in the sewer. It started one day when we were dropping rocks down inside it to hear the echo, and then we started yelling into it and something answered back. It was this echoing noise that sounded kind of like faraway water running in a pipe, but also kind of like the songs whales make, all mixed together. It's really hard to explain. It sounded very faint but very distinct. So, we yelled again, and it responded again. The noises lasted for maybe 5 to 10 seconds then stopped. Some answers were longer than others. We kept testing it, we were asking it questions like, "Do you live in the pipes? Are you a ghost?" etc. And when we were finished speaking it would make the sound again. The space of time between our questions and the corresponding sound varied. Sometimes it was immediate and sometimes there was a short wait. We weren't even freaked out though, we were kids and we just thought it was really cool and weird. So, we said goodbye and left, but we checked back the next day and it was still there. We waited in silence before we initiated conversation, trying to listen for the noise, but there was nothing. Then we started yelling and it started back up again. And so, we just kept coming back and talking to it. We always said hello and goodbye. We would experiment with the things we said to see if we got different reactions. Sometimes we would insult it and then say, "Just kidding," right afterward, being dumb. I would bring my friends to show it off, but they would get creeped out and want to leave. Once my brother and I brought a whole group of kids, but the noise never came back. We were just hollering into emptiness like idiots, and they all thought we made it up. Then when I went back to basically ask, "Where were you, dude?" it took like 10 minutes to hear it again. Weirdly, I had forgotten all about this incident until a couple of years ago. I was so young when it happened that I just accepted it as a bizarre but mundane part of my life. I had entire meaningful chat sessions with this thing, man. My brother had forgotten all about it too, until I brought it up fairly recently. No idea what it could be. A while back I was hanging out in the local park/forest with 3 other friends. We went quite far into the forest, and it was getting dark when we picked a spot to stay for a little while. We kept teasing each other with basic imagery of things you wouldn't want to come across while sitting in the middle of the woods during dark, like creepypasta and such. All of a sudden one of us pointed to the right, saying there's a person walking towards us. We thought he was kidding, but once we all looked to the right there was this woman walking up to us looking like a figure from your typical horror film. I don't mean any of this in an offensive way. She was quite tall and very pale, wearing a short black dress and heels, with her Johnny Greenwood-style black hair hanging in front of her eyes. Out of courtesy I said, "Good evening," which triggered a conversation. She stared at all of us individually with quite a lost look in her eyes when she proceeded to say in a voice that resembled one of a tired child, "Have you guys seen any deer yet?" We told her we hadn't. "I meant roetters," she said while looking behind us. I told her we had neither, and since I noticed my friends and myself were becoming slightly uncomfortable, I told her we'd go looking for them and I wished her a good evening once more. She kept staring behind us for a bit longer and then she left without saying a word. After freaking out over this unusual appearance for a bit, we decided to head to the entrance of the forest. We saw the lady walking back in the direction she came from when we cycled by. We were publicizing the situation while cycling back, and when we were nearing the entrance, we saw a figure walking towards the entrance as well. I jokingly said the figure is the lady, since she was walking on high heels and we were cycling, thinking it wouldn't be likely for her to be any quicker than us, and once we came closer it appeared to be actually her. She moved her hair away from her eyes and looked directly at me, probably since I was cycling in front, and she said, "I've stumbled across 4 roetters already, back there, in the forest." I nodded and we cycled our way out of the woods. The thing that freaks us out is the fact that she stated she had seen 4 roetters within the time span of plus or minus 10 minutes, and the 4 of us were out in the forest when she saw us. It's not that scary of a story, but it's one that freaked me out quite a bit. My mom has the best paranormal ghost experience that I've heard recounted to me, that is impossible for me to find a believable rational explanation for. She's Kate. It happened when she was on holiday with her parents. They were on their way to Devon from Suffolk. This journey took a long time and required an overnight stop. She was around 14 years old at the time, very precocious and willful, but enjoying the prospect of a small holiday with her mom and dad. They arrive at a hotel for the overnight stop, and Kate goes to relax for a bit in the TV alcove they have upstairs while her parents go for a drink at the bar. Happily watching TV, she's surprised to see a man poking his head into the alcove, and the only way she can describe how he looks is he had very old skin. Despite being startled, she apologizes and offers the use of the TV to the man, who just stares back at her blankly, and then leaves just as suddenly as he arrived. Kate is a little freaked out by this, and upon reuniting with her parents before getting to their rooms for the night, she remembers telling them about the man, hoping she hadn't upset anyone. She expected that's probably the man in room 3, but instead they seemed confused and perturbed, to use Kate's words. Kate has a room to herself, so says goodnight to her parents and goes to bed. Once in bed, Kate starts to read her book. She's been reading in bed since she could read, and usually falls asleep to this day with a book in her hand, fully enveloped in the story, when the strangest thing happens. I'm going to use the word she used when she first told me this story. I felt a man walk through the wall behind me to my left. I was so scared that I immediately hid under my bed covers and shut my eyes as hard as I could and wished for him to go away. I felt him slowly walk down the left side of my bed, around the end of the bed, and continued in that direction until he went through the wall facing the right side of my bed. When she couldn't feel him anymore, she came out from under the covers, and decided that she must be going mad, letting her imagination get away from her. To this day she is a very pragmatic, skeptical person, so she thought it was in her head, and that was the end of it. Fast forward to 10 to 14 years later, and she's having dinner with her parents, which isn't a regular occurrence as she's moved to London, where she would meet my dad and later have me, but her parents still live in Suffolk. They are talking about weird experiences they've had, or their friends have had, and my mum remembers this experience, leading with, "I got myself all worked up in that hotel we stayed at thinking someone walked through the wall." Once her mum hears this, however, she goes white and has a serious look on her face. She explains that she had exactly the same experience. Upon discussing the night further, they work out the wall the thing walked through from my mum's room was the wall straight into her parents' room. About 6 or 7 years ago, while living with someone else entirely, I woke up from a dream with a name on my mind and my lips, a girl that I hadn't seen since high school, one who I never really interacted with. I didn't think much about it for a few years. That relationship ended, and eventually I moved back home. My mom said that I was going to fall in love and get married very quickly and live happily ever after. Mothers are great for that kind of stuff, aren't they? The last thing I wanted to do was move back in with my parents. After much consideration, most of which had to do with a lack of rent money, I moved home. Within a month, I was part of a local music venue/craft beer bar. The owner sold the business to a friend of mine at the time and myself by the end of that year, and the next summer, that girl that I dreamed about walked right into my bar when I was behind it serving drinks. She was living 400 miles away and just happened to be home for the weekend. She deliberated about going in because we charged a cover, but eventually gave in and met her friend. Gone is the air in my lungs. KZ goes the room. 3 years later, we are married. Shortly after I moved back home and met my wife, I had another dream. In this dream, I was looking at my wife and kids from the living room, through a pass-through area with cupboards, and into a large seemingly recently renovated kitchen. Of course, we moved into this house about a year or two after I had the dream. The kitchen hasn't been remodeled yet and the pass-through area is currently our computer room, but it's the same thing I saw in my dream. Better get moving on those renovations. When I was 9, my family moved across town to a bigger house that had been on the market for several years. It was a pretty nice house, and my parents were thrilled that the price was reasonable enough for them to afford. After moving in, we all kind of had the feeling that the house was haunted. Petty things would happen that we couldn't explain, and there was just a general sense of unease. We also learned that the family that lived there before us had been struck by tragedy. The parents had gone away to celebrate their anniversary, and on the way back, got into a car accident and died. The kids' grandparents ended up in custody and the house was put on the market. It was an unsettling story to think about and only added to the spookiness. The experience that I think most convinced us that something paranormal really was going on happened a couple of years after we moved. My sister had gone out with friends and my mom was in bed, unable to fall asleep. I don't know what prompted it, but at one point my mom went upstairs to my sister's bedroom to check that she'd made it home safely and found her asleep in her bed. She gave her a kiss on the cheek and went back down to bed, finally able to sleep. The next morning, my mom went down to the basement to do laundry and found my sister asleep on the couch. Our basement was finished and occasionally, some of us would fall asleep down there while watching the dive. Confused, she asked, "When did you move to the basement?" "You were sound asleep in your bed when I checked on you last night at 11. Just as confused, my sister answered that she had gone straight downstairs when she came home and had fallen asleep there. Furthermore, she admitted that she had stayed out past curfew and hadn't gotten home until around 1. "Rachel," my mom said, "I saw you. I kissed your cheek." Are you kidding? But indeed, she was not. Later, my mom told the story at a family picnic. My cousin, who lived next door, was shocked. She explained that same night, she was looking out a window, waiting for her ride to come, when she saw a girl wearing a nightgown come out our side door, run through our yard, jump bizarrely in front of our house, and vanish. She said the girl looked like Rachel. I miss them, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how they could have gotten there.
A few years back, I was preparing for an overnight camping trip in an area that didn't have any cell phone service. My mom called me to tell me my grandpa was going in that day for a quick routine surgery, and that I should give him a call before I head out of cell service to send him my love and well wishes. I did so, and went off camping without a worry in my heart. That night, I had incredibly vivid dreams that I was at the hospital where my grandpa was, and that things weren't going well. I was watching my mom panic and worry, as well as my grandma. They discussed whether to let him go or not. I saw him on the operating table. I was there. I was with him when he died. When I woke up the next morning crying, I told my boyfriend that my grandpa had died and that my mom is probably trying to get a hold of me. He reassured me that it was just a bad dream brought on by the worry of someone I love being in the hospital, but I knew. I just felt it. So, we drove to the nearest town, and I called my mom. She answered in tears and told me that my grandpa had indeed died from unforeseen complications. I told her about my dream, and she was shocked. The scenes and conversations I described were exactly what happened in the hospital. I described what the hospital looked like. I had never been there as I lived in a different province, and sure enough, my mom confirmed my descriptions. I have never before or never since experienced anything like this, or anything paranormal whatsoever. I know though, that I was with my grandpa in his last moments, in that hospital. This happened back in June. I had to renew the registration on my car, and decided to do it on my lunch break. That morning, I bought a snack at work and used my personal checking account debit card rather than the joint account card I have with my husband. I had just been paid and I knew my personal checking card had money to cover both the snack and the fees for my renewal. A few hours later, I headed over to the DMV. I gave the lady my inspection paperwork and last year's registration card and took out what I assumed was my personal checking card. As I handed it over to the DMV lady, I realized the card was actually my card to the joint account. My other card was nowhere to be found. Luckily, I have just enough to cover the renewal in that account and do a quick transfer once I leave so I don't bounce any bills that money was actually intended for. I tore my car, wallet, and desk away from work apart looking for my personal checking card because I knew I had it that morning. I even pulled my account up to verify I used it to buy my snack that morning. I figure I must have dropped it somewhere at work or in the parking lot and put a freezer on the card. Get home, tell my husband I lost my card, and go to my room to change. Open the door, and on the floor in front of my dresser is my missing card. I log into my bank account to verify that I had used it that morning, and again, the charge is there. I didn't come home before going to the DMV, yet there my card lay on the floor. No idea how it got there, still creeped out. This was fairly recent, a few months ago, like in March or April I would assume. But for a bit of a backstory, there is this abandoned mental hospital that my mom was a patient at, and my dad worked at for quite a while. It's actually how they met. The hospital has been closed since January of 2006, and it's a state hospital, and it's huge. Over 80-some acres. Since then, the state has been trying to figure out what the hell to do with it, and some of the buildings are used to house gov offices and such, but most of them are completely vacant, and before this incident I had been inside most of the buildings, besides a few that are those offices, and I have been through a lot of the tunnels that connect every building, and they honestly look like exactly what you would see in a cheesy horror film. Anyhow, me, my boyfriend, and our friend, let's call him Brian, all enjoy coming to this hospital because it's a lot of fun to explore, and we all love this. So, we got there, business as usual. How we typically approach the nights that we explore here. We're all dressed in black, warmish clothes, because it gets cold pretty quickly, and we head out to where we always enter the tunnels and go through buildings that way. So, we have spent about an hour or so exploring different buildings, walking the tunnels, and me taking pictures for Instagram cause I'm /that/ person. And we get really far and deep into the tunnels, to the point where I'm starting to question where we are. I am typically pretty calm given I am so used to this hospital, and know where I am, but I do get scared extremely easily, especially by loud noises, given I have extremely sensitive ears. We all came to a bit of a halt, cause Brian found a room that he decided he wanted to check out, and my boyfriend and I were waiting outside of it, just talking and me taking a few photos. To the right of us, there's a small little passage, which leads to a door with that distorted type of glass pane, and one of those older lights that hang over the top of the door. Brian, as a teenager, saw a fire extinguisher and decided to do as any other would do and blast it. The noise scared me. I fell to the ground and fainted for a few seconds, and my boyfriend and Brian were laughing, of course, and my boyfriend started picking me up. We all heard a noise suddenly, and I'm struggling to get up, and my boyfriend looks over to the right where the door is, and sees nothing through the glass, but saw a hand reach from inside the door to push it open. The door opened and no one was there, but we all ran for it. I looked back several times and no one ever followed us, but regardless of what happened, I think that's the fastest I have ever run in my life. I'm the first person to try and disprove any paranormal occurrence with logic. But there was nothing that made sense to me logically, and to this day we all don't know what happened that night. A few years ago, I ran into someone from high school at a pub in my hometown. I was never really close with Ryan in school, and I don't think we ever talked, but this night we actually spent a lot of time chatting, sharing cigs, and having fun with a couple of mutual friends. He was so friendly, and we shared a lot of interests, so it felt kind of incredible that we'd never hung out before. Our city isn't that big. After the group of us concluded the evening with a terrible rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody at around 2 a.m., I went to leave and walk to my boyfriend's house nearby. When I mentioned that I was walking alone, he insisted that he and a couple of his friends walk me. It was a short distance, and I didn't want to impose, but they were going the same direction. I said sure, and off we went. As we finally reached my boyfriend's street, I turned to head towards his house, and Ryan gave me a pack of cigarettes with 3 inside. I'd been mooching them from him all night. I only ever smoked on the weekends when I was drinking. About a month later, I woke up for work on a Wednesday and was craving a cigarette. This was really unlike me. I leisurely enjoyed the last of the 3 cigarettes from the package Ryan had given me and headed to work. During my lunch break, I was on my Facebook and saw many RIP Ryan messages posted by mutual friends. I thought it was a hoax, because he was known as quite a jokester. Turns out he had committed suicide the night before. Why that day of all days, to wake up craving a cigarette? I've always been interested in the symbolism/different interpretations of the meaning of the number 3, so to finish the 3rd and final cigarette that day hours after his death felt odd in retrospect. My parents' house was brand new in a really nice subdivision, and I was 5 when we moved. I wasn't ever an anxious kid or anything, but I was terrified of the house. I refused to be upstairs alone, and I had really frequent panic attacks. We lived there for 15 years before I moved out, and I was never comfortable. I live in a 75-year-old farmhouse now, and I don't get uncomfortable the way I did in that house. Only one creepy thing actually ever happened to me there though, and this is it. Last year, 32-week pregnant me went back up to see my grandmother before I had this baby, and I was staying with my parents, but my dad was traveling for work, so it was just my mom, my sister, and me. My mom had gone to the grocery store, and I was lying on the sofa. The way the living room is set up, you can see the reflection of the bottom 2 feet of the foyer and staircase in the TV, and also the kitchen on the other side of the living room. So, I'm lying there messing around with my phone, and I hear the stairs creaking. I look up at the reflection in the TV, and I see a pair of bare feet standing in the foyer. I think it's my sister, so I tell her to come and sit with me and feel the baby kicking. There's no reply, and my feet turn and walk towards the kitchen. So, I sit up to say hey, and there's no one there. At all. My sister wasn't even home, she'd gone to work. My parents have moved closer now, and they're closing the sale of that house at the end of this month. They're a little sad, but I'm relieved.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.